He had the badge. The credentials. The federal clearance. But in less than 7 minutes, an FBI agent was forced to the ground in a corporate lobby treated like a suspect, not a specialist. Why? Because someone thought he looked suspicious. It wasn't a threat. There was no gun drawn. No shouting. No crime committed. Just a black man waiting for a meeting with a Bluetooth in his ear and a laptop bag on his shoulder. And that was enough to trigger a call to police, a slow-drawn escalation, and a silent standoff that almost cost him his career, or worse. But the real twist? The officer who detained him was only 10 minutes away from being interviewed by the Bureau. By the very man now sitting on the cold tile floor. This story isn't about violence. It's about something more dangerous. Assumptions. If you think you know how this ends, think again. Because what happens when the truth walks out of the elevator will change everything. Stick around. What you're about to see isn't just a story, it's a mirror. Drop a comment below, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true-to-life stories that make you stop and think. He had the badge, the credentials, the authority, but somehow, he was still treated like a suspect. And what happened next would prove that the wrong look, at the wrong time, in front of the wrong person, could flip a man's whole day upside down. It was 10:15 on a Tuesday morning. The lobby of the Capitol Point Executive Complex in downtown Richmond, Virginia, was the kind of place where people passed through like whispers, polished, predictable, beige. Rows of gray leather chairs lined the walls. A few potted plants, a high-gloss tile floor, and a front desk operated by someone who clearly resented being there, but managed to fake just enough courtesy to keep the job. In that lobby, no one paid too much attention to anyone else. People moved with earbuds in, eyes on screens, feet tapping impatiently as they waited for elevators. But that morning, someone did pay attention. And it only took 1 second for their assumptions to start writing a new story, one that had nothing to do with the facts. Dorian Banks stepped into the lobby like a man who had somewhere to be because he did. He walked with a quiet confidence that didn't beg for attention but still commanded space. Dark wash jeans, a crisp charcoal button-down shirt, and a black laptop bag slung over one shoulder. His steps were measured. His shoulders squared. He nodded once to the uniformed security guard near the desk, a subtle gesture, calm and respectful. The guard didn't respond. Dorian didn't pause. He crossed the open space and stood near the far wall, away from the sitting area, eyes focused on the screen of his phone. A Bluetooth earpiece blinked softly in his right ear as he scrolled through documents and listened to a briefing from his team. Every few seconds, he'd speak into the mic, low, controlled, and barely audible to anyone nearby. To anyone who knew him, this was just Dorian preparing for a meeting, efficient, focused, unbothered. But not everyone in that lobby knew him. And one person didn't need to know him to decide something was off. From behind the sleek marble reception desk, a newly hired administrative assistant named Caitlin Mercer squinted at him. She was new to Brightridge Data Solutions, fresh out of college, still memorizing names and floor numbers, but somehow, Dorian's presence made her uneasy. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't loud. He wasn't pacing wildly or talking to himself. But to her. He just looked out of place. She leaned over to her coworker, barely whispering, "Do you know that guy?" The woman next to her didn't even look up from her keyboard. Nope. Caitlin didn't stop there. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she watched Dorian glance down at his phone again. He's been standing there for a while. Talking to himself. I don't know, he's acting weird. In her mind, the image began to form, a lone man, dark clothes, Bluetooth in one ear, saying things no one else could hear. It didn't matter that everything he was doing was normal. The pieces clicked together in the wrong order. She didn't walk over to ask if he needed help. She didn't check the visitor's log or glance at the directory by the elevator that listed every name and office in the building. Instead, she picked up the desk phone. "Hi, this is Caitlin at the front desk. We've got someone in the lobby. I'm not sure what he's doing. He's just kind of standing there, pacing a little, talking to himself. Might want to send someone down. He's acting suspicious. That word suspicious was all it took. Upstairs on the third floor, Dorian's contact at Brightridge was still stuck in another meeting and had no idea what was unfolding down below. And Dorian? He was exactly where he was supposed to be, on time, checked in, and waiting. But none of that mattered now. Because outside, in the parking lot just beyond the glass entrance, 2 Richmond PD patrol officers had already pulled in. The dispatch call hadn't mentioned weapons or threats, just a vague report of a suspicious individual inside a commercial property. The kind of call that wasn't urgent but couldn't be ignored. Officer Marcus Holloway and his partner, Officer Serena Vale, had been on patrol nearby. They weren't rookies, but they weren't veterans either. Holloway was the type to take every call seriously, sometimes a little too seriously. Vale, on the other hand, was more reserved, more methodical. She liked to pause and assess before acting. Male, black, mid to late 30s, dark clothing, Bluetooth in ear. Caller said he might be casing the place, the dispatcher had said over the radio. Holloway looked at Vale as he turned the steering wheel into the lot. Casing, huh? Could be nothing, Vale said flatly. Or it could be something. They parked near the building's front entrance, the squad car engine ticking as it shut down. Inside, Caitlin watched from the desk, arms folded across her chest. Her lips pressed into a line, not smug, not apologetic. Just, waiting. Dorian didn't see them approach. He was reviewing a PDF now, eyes narrowed in concentration. His voice, low and professional, came through the Bluetooth mic. Subject confirmed. Location secured. Waiting on internal contact. Will proceed with intake on arrival. The glass doors opened behind him. And then it began. Sir, can we speak with you for a moment? The voice echoed across the lobby, sharp against the marble. Dorian turned, startled, not scared, just thrown. Sure. What's this about? Would you mind stepping away from the wall and keeping your hands visible? He blinked, confused but compliant. I'm with the agency, he said. Here for a scheduled meeting. Agency? Officer Holloway asked, stepping forward. Which agency? Federal Bureau of Investigation, Dorian replied, calm and even. I have ID. Yeah. Let's see it. No problem, Dorian said. Let me just grab it from my bag. Sir, don't reach. The words hit like a stun grenade. Time slowed. Dorian's hand froze mid-motion. The entire lobby went quiet, eerily so. 1 second ago, this was a federal agent reviewing files. Now, suddenly, he was being treated like a threat. Dorian Banks stood frozen, one hand inches from his laptop bag, the other still slightly raised as if to say, let's not do this. The silence in the lobby turned sharp, like glass under pressure. Even the air felt tighter. I just said, Dorian spoke slowly, his voice still calm but with a firmer edge, I'm reaching for my credentials. That's all. Officer Vale took a small step closer now, her eyes flicking between Dorian's hands and his face, reading every micro-expression. Officer Holloway's posture, however, stiffened even further, feet apart, one hand subtly near his belt, the other hovering too close to his holster. Set the bag down, Vale instructed. Open it slowly. Dorian obeyed without protest. He knelt on one knee, carefully unzipped the side pocket, and left the flap open. My badge is in the front slot. Silver case with the photo ID. You can pull it out yourself if that feels safer. Holloway didn't move. Not right away. Dorian stayed still, motionless, measured, trying not to breathe too loud, too deep, too fast. I'm here to meet with a Brightridge Rep. Cybercrime Coordination Task Force. You can call Agent Lisa Chen from the Richmond Field Office. She'll confirm. But no one called. Not yet. Behind the reception desk, Caitlin Mercer watched the scene unfold like a movie she hadn't meant to start but now couldn't look away from. Her fingers clutched the edge of the counter. She said nothing. "Sir," Holloway's voice cut through again, louder now. "I need you to sit down. On the floor. Hands visible." Dorian blinked. "Is that really necessary?" "It's for everyone's safety." A pause. Not long. But long enough for everyone in the room to feel how absurd the moment had become. Dorian slowly lowered himself to the cold tile floor, palms out, laptop bag a few feet beside him. His movements were deliberate, like a man who had practiced this scenario in his head too many times before. Upstairs, in a conference room on the third floor, someone finally stepped into the elevator. It would take less than a minute to reach the lobby. But down here, every second ticked like an hour. Officer Vale adjusted her stance. Dorian watched her. He watched Holloway too, the way his fingers twitched slightly near his sidearm, the way his body never relaxed, like he was bracing for something Dorian hadn't even thought to do. "Are you armed, sir?" Vale asked. Dorian answered clearly. "Yes." Bureau-issued Glock 19, concealed carry, right hip, fully authorized. "My credentials are in the bag." Left side zip. Still, Holloway didn't move. Vale crouched low, moving cautiously to the bag's left pocket. Dorian didn't shift. He didn't breathe. He just watched. She found the silver badge case exactly where he said it would be. She opened it, thumbed through the FBI photo ID and license, checking for anything off. Everything was real. Everything matched. She looked at Dorian. Then back at Holloway. "Looks legit," she said quietly. But Holloway's posture didn't change. "We still need to confirm." Dorian didn't flinch. "Then call. The Richmond field office is 3 blocks away." His voice had a tone now, not anger, not sarcasm, just fatigue. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from having to repeat your own legitimacy over and over to people who only hear doubt. The lobby doors opened again with a pneumatic hiss. 2 building security guards entered, one older with graying hair and a radio on his hip, the other a lanky rookie who clearly didn't expect this much drama before lunch. They paused at the threshold, absorbing the scene. An FBI agent on the floor. 2 officers looming above him. A receptionist who looked like she wanted to disappear into her desk. The older guard stepped forward and whispered something to Vale. She nodded, eyes never leaving Dorian. Dorian finally spoke again. "I'm not trying to be difficult. But I'm not a threat. I'm not reaching for anything. I'm not going to make any sudden moves. I'm doing my job." Vale stood up fully, holding his badge case in her hand. She turned toward Holloway. "We should call it in." But Holloway didn't respond. His jaw locked, eyes still fixed on Dorian, like he was waiting for the mask to drop, like professionalism and calm demeanor were just a cover for something darker. It had been barely 5 minutes. But it felt like 30. And then came the sound no one expected, but that changed everything. The soft ding of the elevator. The doors slid open slowly behind them. Out stepped Special Agent Lisa Chin. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun, FBI credentials clipped neatly to her hip, a brown leather folio in one hand, and a steaming cup of coffee in the other. She looked like someone ready to walk into a high-level security briefing, not into this. But the moment her eyes locked on the scene, Dorian on the floor, 2 uniformed officers hovering, the tension so thick you could chew it, she stopped cold. "What the hell is going on here?" she said, voice cutting clean across the polished marble like a razor. Everyone turned. Dorian didn't flinch. He looked up at her and offered the faintest nod. "Morning, Lisa." She walked forward, not hurriedly, but with a purpose that made everyone step back a half inch. Why is my lead investigator sitting on the goddamn floor? Officer Holloway opened his mouth to speak. Ma'am, we were responding to a suspicious. This man, Lisa cut in, pointing directly at Dorian, is Special Agent Dorian Banks. He's here under my authority. You're holding his badge in your hand. So I'll ask again, why is he on the floor? Vale stepped in, voice quieter now. We were told he was acting suspicious. Security asked us to investigate. He admitted he was armed. We followed protocol. Lisa narrowed her eyes. Did he resist? No. Did he threaten anyone? No. She turned to Holloway now. So you saw a black man standing alone in a lobby with a Bluetooth earpiece, and your next move was to pull a gun and make him sit on the floor. Holloway didn't answer. The room didn't breathe. Dorian slowly stood, brushing tile dust from his jeans. 7 minutes, he said flatly. That's how long I sat there while they looked at me like I might blow the place up. Lisa's jaw clenched. She turned to the officers, the badge still in her hand like a verdict. You need to do a whole lot more than follow protocol, she said. And none of them could unsee what they'd just created. The air in the lobby stayed thick, charged with a kind of energy that didn't dissipate even as Dorian Banks stood upright. His breathing was steady, but his shoulders carried a weight that hadn't been there when he entered the building that morning. Special Agent Lisa Chin didn't wait for anyone to justify the past 7 minutes. You have his badge, she said, turning to Officer Vale. You had his name. You had the chance to verify everything with one call. So tell me, why didn't you? Vale didn't blink. She held the badge case like it was heavier now. We were trying to assess the situation, she said, though even she didn't seem convinced by the words leaving her mouth. Lisa raised a single brow. Assess? You mean you were deciding whether he looked dangerous enough to escalate? There was no shouting, no dramatics. Just quiet authority. Officer Holloway shifted, finally speaking. We responded to the call. The receptionist said he was behaving strangely. Wouldn't answer questions. Lisa cut in again. Did she ask him any? The silence was deafening. Across the room, Caitlin Mercer looked like she wanted to melt behind the front desk. Her hand still hovered near the phone like maybe, just maybe, she could rewind time by putting it back on the receiver. Dorian looked at her now. Not with anger, not even accusation. Just a quiet fatigue. You know what the funny part is, he said, voice level. I was standing right next to the building directory. All you had to do was ask my name. Caitlin opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her fingers trembled slightly as they dropped to her side. But Lisa wasn't done, not even close. She stepped closer to the officers, her words now sharpened by something colder than anger. Before I walked into this building, she said, her voice low, Agent Banks reviewed a personnel file that crossed his desk this morning. It was an application for transfer into the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Holloway blinked. Lisa tilted her head. Let me guess, the name on that file was Marcus Holloway. You could have heard the HVAC hum between the seconds that followed. Holloway opened his mouth again. Excuse me. Lisa looked him square in the eyes. You applied. You listed your commendations, your field time, even that incident where you de-escalated a domestic dispute without backup. Solid file, honestly. Dorian crossed his arms. I'm the one who flagged it for interview, he said. Thought you might have good instincts. Might be someone who sees people clearly. Holloway's face tightened. Words tried to form but never made it past his throat. You were 10 minutes away from making your first impression with the Bureau, Lisa added, her tone clinical now. And this is what we walked into. Vale shifted slightly, her posture less guarded now more introspective. She glanced at her partner, then back at Dorian. She didn't speak, but her silence said what her badge never could, this was bigger than a policy check. This was about perception, power, and everything they were supposed to be trained to recognize in others except when it came to themselves. Caitlin turned slowly and began to retreat behind the reception desk. Her presence shrank with every step. No one stopped her. Dorian didn't follow her with his eyes. He didn't need to. The weight of her silence had already said everything. "This is why we talk about bias," Dorian said, his voice now not just calm but heavy with meaning. "Because it doesn't have to be violent to be dangerous. Sometimes, it's just a phone call. A choice not to ask a question. A hand that lingers too long near a weapon." Holloway finally broke the silence. "I didn't know." Lisa didn't blink. "That's the problem, Officer Holloway. You didn't want to know. You didn't even pause long enough to find out." The whole lobby now felt like a courtroom. The kind where truth isn't yelled but held in stillness so deep, it forces everyone to look inward. Dorian turned toward Vale. "You read my badge. You saw the credentials. You knew it checked out." Vale nodded slowly. "I did." She lowered her voice. "And I didn't press the issue. I should have." He nodded once. "We don't get to choose the moments that test us," he said. "Only how we handle them." Another ding. The elevator behind them opened again. This time, it was the actual Brightridge executive Kenneth Madsen, mid-40s, expensive blazer, clutching a tablet, confusion etched across his face. He looked around at the officers, the lobby's frozen tension, the agent who looked more like a statue than a man. Dorian?" he asked, clearly unsure what he had just walked into. Dorian gave a tight smile. "We still doing the briefing?" Lisa handed him the folio. "I'll meet you upstairs," she said, but as he turned to walk toward the elevator, she added, "Dorian." He turned back. "If they still want the interview," she said, loud enough for both officers to hear, "remind them that the first question won't be about protocol. It'll be about this." Dorian nodded, adjusted the strap on his bag, and walked to the elevator again. Just before the doors closed, he turned around one last time. His eyes locked with Holloway's. "I want you to remember something," he said. "The only difference between you and me in that lobby, was that I knew who I was." Holloway said nothing. And for the first time all morning, he didn't look like a police officer. He just looked like a man wearing a uniform that suddenly felt too big. The elevator doors slid shut with a smooth metallic hush, and Dorian Banks vanished behind them, the air in the lobby left to settle like dust after a storm. Special Agent Lisa Chen turned away, her heels clicking softly across the marble as she moved toward the building directory near the desk. Her tone was calm, but her presence still crackled with quiet voltage. The officers didn't follow her, at least not right away. Behind the reception desk, Caitlin Mercer had returned to her chair, but she wasn't typing. Her hands hovered above the keyboard like she'd forgotten what they were supposed to do. The glow from the monitor reflected faintly off her face, but her expression was distant, shell-shocked. She didn't make eye contact with anyone. No one had yelled. No voices had been raised. But the weight of what had happened filled the space louder than any siren ever could. Officer Serena Vale finally looked toward her partner. Marcus Holloway hadn't moved since Dorian's parting words. He stood stiff, hands by his side, badge on his chest, but his face looked like it belonged to someone watching themselves in the mirror for the first time and not recognizing the person looking back. Vale stepped closer. "You okay?" she asked, quiet but deliberate. Holloway didn't respond right away. His eyes were still fixed on the elevator, now closed, its brass indicator softly glowing the number 5. "I applied to the bureau," he said finally. "Because I wanted to do more. I wanted to be better than this." Vale nodded once, slow. "Maybe today was your first chance to start doing that." He let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Didn't feel like it." "No," she agreed. "It didn't. But maybe it still can." She looked toward Caitlin, who now sat silently, her shoulders hunched, the phone still within reach mocking her. Vale turned back to her partner. What we do next matters more than what we did the last 10 minutes. Holloway nodded faintly, but his posture remained rigid. You think they'll still consider my application? Vale didn't answer. Because that wasn't the question that mattered. Upstairs, Dorian stepped into the 5th-floor hallway. The walls were lined with frosted glass offices, recessed lighting humming faintly overhead. The quiet here was different. It wasn't charged or accusatory. It just felt ordinary. Lisa Chen waited by the conference room door, holding it open. You want me to walk in with you? She asked. Dorian shook his head. No. I got it. Lisa studied his face for a second longer. You sure? He nodded once, eyes focused but tired. Yeah. She didn't push. She handed him her car keys. I'll call you later. Dorian gave her a small nod and stepped inside alone. The conference room was already set up, digital display glowing with the Brightridge Analytics logo, chairs arranged in a semicircle, a pot of fresh coffee steaming in the corner. A team of analysts looked up as he entered. One of them, Kenneth Madsen, the executive who had entered the lobby earlier, stood and extended a hand. Agent Banks. Glad you made it. Dorian shook his hand. Sorry for the delay. Had a small, procedural detour downstairs. They chuckled politely, none of them realizing the full weight of those words. Dorian connected his laptop, opened his file directory, and launched the case presentation on a major cybercrime ring they'd been tracking for months. His voice was clear. His points were sharp. His composure immaculate. If anyone sensed a tremor beneath the surface, they didn't say it out loud. But beneath the polished delivery, the weight hadn't left. It never did. It just rearranged itself into something that could be carried more quietly. Downstairs, Officer Vale lingered in the lobby while Holloway walked outside. He didn't go far, just to the far end of the parking lot, where the patrol cruiser sat parked between two compact cars. He leaned against the hood, eyes squinting up at the overcast sky, as if searching for something that might give him back the certainty he walked in with. Vale turned toward Caitlin, still silent behind the desk. For a moment, the officer just looked at her, really looked. You called it in, Vale said. Caitlin blinked, like waking from a dream. Yeah. I didn't know. You didn't ask. Caitlin's mouth tightened. He looked like he didn't belong. What does that look like? The question wasn't aggressive. Just honest. Caitlin didn't answer. Vale nodded like she expected that. The things we don't say still shape everything. Then she turned and walked out. Back on the 5th floor, the meeting wrapped an hour later. Dorian unplugged his laptop, shook hands, nodded at polite compliments, and kept the same professional smile he always wore. But Lisa could tell the energy was different. They stepped into the hallway together. She handed him his badge case. You want me to come down with you? He shook his head. No. I'll be fine. She hesitated. You sure? He gave her a tired smile. I'm fine. Just tired. She nodded, didn't press. The elevator doors opened and he stepped in alone. There was no music, just the soft hum of mechanics and the blink of descending numbers overhead. When the doors slid open in the lobby, he didn't expect anyone to be waiting. But Officer Vale was still there. She leaned casually against a marble column, arms crossed, not defensive, not detached. Just present. Dorian walked past her without stopping. But she stepped forward. Agent Banks. He paused. I stayed, she said. Because I wanted to say something. Not because anyone told me to. He looked at her, waiting. You were right, she continued. I read your badge. I saw the credentials. But I still stood there and let it happen. I didn't ask questions. I didn't speak up. I just watched. Dorian's voice was low. Why are you telling me now? Because I don't want to be another person who sees the truth too late and just walks away. He studied her face. She wasn't trying to save face. There was no badge to flash, no status to defend. Just a person trying to own what they'd failed to do. Apologies don't fix much, Dorian said. They don't erase fear. They don't undo this. I know, she said. But accountability starts with saying it out loud. He nodded slowly. Most people don't even get that far. They stood in silence for a few seconds. Vale exhaled. I thought I knew what bias looked like. And I didn't know it could wear a uniform like mine. That got a faint smile out of Dorian. Small. Earned. It wears all kinds of things, he said. Suits. Scrubs. Security shirts. Even sits behind reception desks. She smiled faintly. You think Holloway still has a shot at the bureau? Dorian's face grew serious again. He does. But only if he's honest with himself first. The bureau doesn't need people who carry power without understanding it. Vale nodded. Dorian turned and walked toward the glass doors. But just before he pushed them open, he looked back. Tell him the interview's still on, he said. But I won't be the one doing all the talking. The glass doors slid open with a soft hiss. Dorian Banks stepped outside into the overcast afternoon, the kind that felt like it might rain but never committed. The parking lot was half full, the distant sound of tires hissing on wet pavement mixed with the chirping of unseen birds. He adjusted the strap on his bag and started toward his car, expecting nothing more than a quiet walk and the hum of the engine on the way back to headquarters. But he wasn't alone. Near the far edge of the lot, leaning against a white Richmond PD patrol cruiser, stood Officer Marcus Holloway. His arms were folded tightly across his chest, his eyes low, jaw clenched not out of anger this time, but something closer to tension wrapped in shame. He looked up when he saw Dorian approach and straightened. For a few seconds, neither of them said a word. Then Dorian slowed, stopping a few feet away. He didn't offer a greeting. Didn't scowl either. He just stood there with a quiet presence that was somehow heavier than before. You waiting for something? Dorian asked, his voice measured. Holloway shook his head slowly. Didn't want to leave like that. Dorian didn't reply. The silence hung in the space between them like a sheet no one wanted to lift. Then Holloway spoke again, not looking at Dorian, but out across the asphalt. This morning, I thought I knew who I was. I thought I was the guy who didn't let this kind of thing happen on his watch. And now? Dorian asked, softly. Holloway finally turned his eyes toward him. Now I think maybe I've just been lucky that no one ever challenged that belief. Dorian nodded once, slowly. You know, he said, in the bureau, we deal with behavior patterns, psychological triggers, subconscious bias. We study how people make decisions they don't even realize they're making. Holloway listened, eyes steady. But what we don't talk about enough, Dorian continued, is how we're not immune to the same patterns we're trained to spot in others. We carry them too. In different uniforms. Different rooms. Different rules. Holloway exhaled. I messed up. Dorian didn't let him off easy. He met his eyes and said plainly, yeah. You did. There was no malice. No gloating. Just truth. But this isn't about protecting your ego, Dorian continued. It's about whether you're willing to learn something uncomfortable, and keep showing up anyway. Holloway's shoulders dropped slightly. The weight had shifted. He wasn't defending himself anymore. He was just trying to understand where to go next. I still want that bureau job, he said, voice quieter now. I still want to make a difference. Dorian reached into his bag without hesitation this time and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. He held it out. Holloway took it slowly, eyebrows knitting. "What is this?" "A prep sheet," Dorian replied. "Interview scenarios. Questions. The kind you don't rehearse for. The kind that reveal who you are when no one's watching." Holloway unfolded it. Bullet points, behavioral hypotheticals, de-escalation failures, integrity checks. Every question hit like a reflection. Dorian turned to leave, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Next time you walk into a room," he said, "don't just see what's there. Ask yourself what you might be missing." And then he walked away, heading toward his car with the same calm stride he'd carried into the building hours earlier. Except now, there was something deeper behind it, not just weariness, but clarity. Behind him, Holloway stood alone in the lot, holding the page like it weighed more than it should. Not because of the paper, but because of what it asked him to see in himself. Inside the cruiser, Vale sat behind the wheel, quietly watching. She didn't say a word when Holloway slid into the passenger seat, still holding the prep sheet like a fragile truth. She didn't ask what was said. She didn't need to. Because something had shifted. The two of them sat there for a while. Not moving. Not speaking. And yet, everything felt different. Back upstairs, the briefing was over. The conference room now half empty, Lisa Chen remained behind, organizing her notes. She received a short text on her phone from Dorian. "All done. On the way back. Thanks for showing up." She smiled faintly. "Always." Then she typed one more thing. "He'll remember this day. So will we." But the story didn't quite end there. Because what Dorian Banks didn't know yet, what hadn't reached him through the Bureau's channels, was that this encounter wasn't just a warning for Holloway. It was a seed. A moment that would shape how two officers moved forward from that day. One would carry it as a silent scar. The other? As a catalyst. Sometimes, redemption doesn't arrive with a headline. Sometimes, it slips quietly into a man's conscience when no one else is watching. The ride back to the Bureau field office was uneventful. No sirens. No flashing lights. No radio chatter breaking through the quiet. Dorian Banks kept both hands on the wheel of Lisa's government-issued SUV, eyes fixed on the road. The city passed in hazy motion beyond the windshield, familiar blocks, worn brick buildings, intersections that felt like clock hands moving in circles. But today, everything looked slightly different. Not because the city had changed. But because something in him had. His phone vibrated once in the center console. A message from Lisa. Executive team was impressed. Solid work, as always. He didn't smile. He didn't reply right away either. Instead, he pulled into the underground parking lot of the Richmond FBI field office, turned off the ignition, and sat still for a long moment, hands resting in his lap, the echoes of the morning still rattling through the spaces behind his ribs. 7 minutes. That's all it took for someone to make a call that could have cost him everything. Not because he was dangerous. But because someone decided he looked like he could be. And for Dorian, that wasn't the first time. It probably wouldn't be the last. But this time, it had a face. A name. A room full of uniforms and silence and power that didn't know what to do with him. And that silence, that's what he kept turning over in his mind. Not the confrontation. Not the commands. But the silence of people who knew better, and still waited. Across town, in a quiet residential neighborhood, Officer Marcus Holloway sat alone at his kitchen table. The folded paper Dorian had given him lay flat between his hands. He hadn't filled in anything yet. He hadn't even touched a pen. But he had read every question. Twice. One of them had stuck harder than the others. Describe a moment when your assumptions interfered with your judgment. What did you do next? He stared at the line. Then reached for a pen. For the first time in his career, he didn't write a defense. He wrote the truth. Meanwhile, back at the field office, Dorian walked through the bullpen past cubicles, case files, agents hunched over monitors and whiteboards. A few nodded as he passed. Some didn't. He stopped by Lisa's office and knocked once. She looked up. "You good?" she asked. He gave a faint nod. Still standing. She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. I want to talk." He did. Lisa leaned back in her chair. "I just got a follow-up call from Brightridge. They want to work with us directly on the data security initiative. Said your presentation sealed it." Dorian nodded. "Glad to hear it. But that's not what I want to talk about." She held up her phone. "Marcus Holloway called me 20 minutes ago. Said he wants to withdraw his application for now. Said he's not ready." Dorian didn't respond right away. Lisa studied him. "I told him he was wrong." Now Dorian looked up. "I told him being ready isn't about being perfect," she said. "It's about being honest enough to know when you've failed and showing up again anyway." Dorian exhaled slowly. "He still has a shot." Lisa nodded. "Because you gave it to him." "No," Dorian said. "Because he took it." They sat in silence a moment longer. Then Lisa asked, "You want to be the one to do his interview if he reapplies?" Dorian smiled, just a little. "Only if he's ready to be asked the hard questions." Lisa grinned. He'd expect nothing less. Later that evening, as dusk settled over the city, Dorian stood outside his apartment building, leaning on the railing of his balcony. The sky was that strange mix of purples and blues, clouds stretched out like silk. He thought about the moments that had changed his life over the years. Most of them hadn't looked dramatic. They weren't all bullets and badges. Some were quiet. Invisible. Just words left unspoken. Just assumptions no one questioned. And yet those moments left marks, too. Because sometimes injustice didn't scream. It just whispered and waited for no one to interrupt. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Serena Vale. "I read your badge." I believed it. But I still hesitated. "I'm working on why." Dorian stared at the screen. Then replied, "That's all it takes to start. Keep going." He locked the phone and turned back toward the city. And for just a second, he let the silence be a good one. One he chose. One that came after truth. The truth is, stories like this don't always end with headlines. They don't always explode into national news or courtroom drama. Sometimes they end in the space between two people, one who finally asks the question they were afraid to ask, and one who decides not to walk away. Sometimes they end in folded papers. In text messages. In someone staying when they could have left. And sometimes, they don't end at all. They just become part of how we choose to move forward. So if this story made you pause, if it made you think about the way you see others, or what you assume before asking, then it did its job. Because silence doesn't make us safe. Awareness does. Understanding does. And accountability, no matter how late it comes, makes space for something better. So share this. Start the conversation. Because the next Dorian Banks might not get 7 minutes. And the next Holloway might not get a second chance. But we all have a chance to do better now. What happened to Agent Dorian Banks wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a moment of truth. A test. Not of his character, but of everyone else's. Because bias doesn't always wear a mask or raise its voice. Sometimes, it's a glance. A decision not to ask. A hand that hovers too close to a holster. It doesn't always explode, it lingers, in silence, in hesitation, in what we choose not to see. But here's the lesson, we don't get to choose whether we face these moments. Only how we respond. And when someone has the courage to speak up, to own their silence, or to change course, that's where progress begins. So if this story made you feel something, if it made you question, reflect, or even get a little uncomfortable, then it did its job. Thank you for watching. Your time, your thoughts, and your voice matter more than you know. If this story moved you, go ahead and drop a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next story that challenges the way we see the world. Until next time, stay aware, stay human.